Today we will be covering language frameworks. Language frameworks are the most essential support system for language. So, it sort of paves our way to solidify our basics for A-level English language. Now, what do I mean when I'm talking about language frameworks? Well, most, if not all of them, are the basic concepts that have acted as our building blocks for English since our primary years. Now you probably know what I'm talking about. They're basically just about everything you've ever known in terms of English through knowledge and intuition. So, in terms of A levels, you will simply be introduced to a more advanced or complex set of terminologies, since they are aligned with linguistics, which is why you can also call these linguistic frameworks. So, today I will give you a guide to the first segment of language frameworks that you should sort of revise and remember, as it will definitely help you strengthen your preparation for the exam. So, let's get right down into it. And over here, I will sort of give you an idea to what we will cover. So, here we have lexis, semantics, pragmatics, grammar, phonology, and graphology, as you can see right over here. So, let's get right down into it. So, first and foremost, we will start with lexis. Now, lexis is the total stock of words, it is the vocabulary of a language. Now, this is different from vocabulary itself. The concept of lexis is more vast and covers collocations, fixed phrases, etc., which is correct, right? Because vocabulary is typically seen as individual words. Now, lexis includes more than just individual words. It also includes word combinations, phrases, and patterns commonly associated with grammar. Now, in linguistics, lexis is properly defined as the complete set of all words in a language, or a specific group of words based on certain language rules. Now we're done with lexis, and now I can tell you that lexis can also be divided into two different segments, informal lexis and formal lexis. Let's head on to the first, which is informal lexis. Now, pretty self-explanatory, informal lexis is typically used more in spoken language, as we tend to use a more casual tone in speaking. Colloquial and non-standard. For example, saying that someone is busted when they're in trouble. The words are typically smaller, contains more monosyllabic words. Now, what is that? Those are words which have one syllable. For example, nice, or grub, or cat, or mat. So the words also tend to contain abbreviations. They're shortened, which, for example, can make you sound more casual and conversational in speaking. So, for example, don't instead of the formal do not, right? And another characteristic is that it typically has Old English roots, for example, house or home. Now, this is something you should just keep in mind for now. It was something we will more properly indulge into as we move on to further parts of the syllabus. So let's keep it right over here and let's move on to formal lexis. Now, formal lexis, of course, as you can see, is in the opposite side of the spectrum, serious and formal language, larger and more complex and informal lexis. So there's more polysyllabic words. Now, polysyllabic words are words which have more than one syllable. Insufficient, understand, understatement, right? So, unlike informal lexis, it is less likely to be abbreviated. So there's did not instead of didn't. There is will not instead of won't, cannot instead of can't. And it often has Latinate roots, words which come from Latin, right? So, for example, residence. So you can sort of get the idea that typically formal lexis are used more in the context of written language, as it tends to be more formal than that of spoken language. For example, you'd probably have a more casual tone in conversation with someone than your written language would have in that of articles or reports, or like even a normal school writing. You probably wouldn't be allowed to write can't and won't instead of cannot and will not or would not, right? So there's that. And with this, we are done with formal lexis and lexis in general, and we'll move on to the next segment, which is semantics. Now, semantics. Semantics is the meaning of words. So how the words are understood, how the words are interpreted. So sometimes the meaning is explicit, which means that the word is definite or clearly stated. There is no underlying story behind the word, it's just what it is. So this is also known as denotation. Sometimes the meaning is implicit, Now, this can take place in a couple ways. So, we have connotation, where the word can be associated with other meanings. Now, red can be associated with blood or love, or blue can be associated with feelings of dullness. Then there is implication, where something can be suggested instead of stated directly. So, when someone tells you you're late, so the person might be implying to you that you are in trouble, right? So basically, the idea you can get is that your words can have a literal meaning without interpretation, like saying that he or she is simply sleeping, right? But you can also diversify the meaning through the use of figurative language, which brings us to this essential feature of semantics, which is figurative language, right? So there are probably some familiar terms here that I'll probably give you a short revision on, right? So there's similes, comparisons that use the words like or as swift as a cheetah, as slow as a sloth, right? Metaphors describes a person, object, or situation as if it were actually as described. Does not use like or as, like similes. So she is a shining star, he is an early bird. Personification, giving an object or situation human qualities. The leaves danced in the wind. Metonymy, part of something describes the whole thing. So dish can be used to mean a whole plate of food, and crown can be used to mean the monarchy itself. Oxymoron brings two contradicting ideas together: bittersweet, terribly good, gentle tyrant, right? So, another feature is using rhetorical devices. Now, there are tons of those, but here are some good examples. You have your very popular hyperbole. If you used to say hyperbole, it's fine, been there, done that. So, using exaggeration to stimulate a more dramatic effect. I told her a million times, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, right? Repetition. A word or phrase is repeated for emphasis. I can't believe it. I honestly can't believe it. Okay? Then there is rhetorical question, which does not require an answer. Can the day get any worse? Do you know how amazing you are? Right? So basically, that is about it for semantics. And basically, one of the major points the field of semantics stresses is that words can definitely have different meanings depending on context. Now, for writers, this paves the way to create more enriched concepts and make their stories more compelling. And as for you students, understanding what these writers are subtly hinting and implying through their texts is one of the key ways to analyze the text themselves. So now we will head on to pragmatics. Now, what is this very mysterious but not so mysterious topic? So it is basically the study of how social contexts affect the way people use language. It focuses on ways people get their meaning across in different social contexts. So this helps us interpret what someone really means when they say something, even if the words themselves might have a different literal meaning. Now I will tune you into some basic features to sort of familiarize this concept. So the features include context, so you consider the situation and surroundings in which language is used. There are speaker intentions, understand what the speaker wants to communicate and why, right? There is inference, fill in the missing information based on context and background knowledge. There's also politeness. Consider how language is used to maintain social harmony and show respect. So, oftentimes, what people say has an underlying ulterior motive behind it. So, these characteristics assist us in understanding the intended meaning behind someone's words, going sort of beyond the surface level of language, right? So these are just a few key features of pragmatics. It's a broad field that encompasses various aspects of language use in communication, which is more extensive when you study linguistics. Now for A-levels, this is a good start. And I will definitely indulge a little more on politeness strategies as it is significant to several areas of the exam. So politeness strategies involve using polite words, phrases, and tones to interact with others in a courteous manner. For example, having an apologetic approach, sorry, but I wanted to, but I, right? To offset their negative response. So people use different politeness strategies depending on how they want to showcase themselves, right? So it can be understood from common sense alone, as in most cases, it is our natural approach to conversation. It is used to show respect, maintain social harmony, and avoid potential conflicts or offense, right? When you analyze various texts, you will very often come across dialogues or phrases where these sorts of strategies are used, as it helps create positive social interactions and sort of ensure that communication is respectful and considerate. So, with that, we are done with pragmatics. Now, this must be the most familiar topic out there for you guys, I hope. Grammar, the rule book for language, controls the way language works, the most basic and expectedly one of the most important language frameworks. So, there are three aspects of grammar. We have word classes, groups that categorize words based on their function and meaning. So, we have irregular nouns, verbs, prepositions, adjectives, pronouns, determiners, etc. Syntax, rules and principles that control the arrangement of words. We also have morphology, how words are formed and what smaller parts make them up. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these ones, starting with word classes. So as you can see, the 8 main word classes all over again. And the next is that it outlines the function and meaning of words used in a sentence. For example, adjectives are useful in advertisements to influence the audience. So there is treat yourself to the tastiest dessert in the capital instead of treat yourself to a nice dessert in the capital. Now, as you can see here, the use of a superlative adjective, tastiest, as opposed to nice, makes the former more persuasive than the latter. So there you go, a very simple marketing strategy. And now let's head on to syntax, which determines the order in which words appear in a sentence. For example, subject, verb, object. Instinctively and intuitively known. For example, you wouldn't say, I tree on a sat. You would say, I sat on a tree. So there's that, and that sometimes the meaning changes depending on the position of the word. She quickly told me to hide, as opposed to she told me to hide quickly. You see? Different meanings, right? Now let's move on to morphology. Now, morphology is basically the study of word formation. How words are formed by combining smaller, meaningful units called morphemes, like suffixes. For example, small plus suffix er and you get smaller if you add them both. Then, how new words are created by adding affixes to existing words, which is also known as derivation. So you can add er to a verb like teach to create a noun, you get teacher. Then you have words which are changed to express grammatical information, also known as inflection. For example, adding s to a noun to make it plural. Fairly simple. So these are just a few basic areas that morphology covers to start with. So grammar in general, though very easy, it is very important that you have the correct terminology, be it derivation or word classes or inflection. Very important to have the correct terminology registered in your head by default, as identifying them as you analyze texts can greatly enrich your answers and make them more linguistically accurate, if you must. So with that, we're done with morphology and grammar in general, and we move on to phonology. Now, phonology is the study of the sounds in language and how they're organized and used to convey meaning. So focuses on differences in pronunciation, for example, differences in accents, because they can differ regionally, for example. It also aids in the analysis and description of linguistic sound patterns. So basically, phonology allows us to sort of distinguish words and comprehend spoken language. And with that, I will now introduce you to some phonological frameworks. So with that, we can start off with rhythm, which is the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in language. Then you have rhyming, the repetition of similar sounds to mainly create a poetic effect. So in terms of poems, at the end of words, that, hat, cat, sat, right? Then you have alliteration, which is the repetition of initial consonant sounds in neighboring words. For example, she sells seashells by the seashore. Then you have assonance, the repetition of vowel sounds within words. The cat sat on a mat. Then there is onomatopoeia, sound words, crack, buzz, thump, etc. So these are some basic frameworks, and one other very important feature that I will introduce is nonverbal communication, right? It is an important area of phonology. It refers to ways of getting your point across without particularly using words. So as you can see here, some nonverbal aspects of speech include pitch, how high or low a person's voice sounds, or volume, the loudness or softness of a person's voice. Then you have pace, the speed at which someone speaks, right? Pauses, breaks, or gaps in speech. Intonation, the rise and fall of pitch in speech, causing a variation in tone. And then you have stress, which sort of emphasizes certain syllables or words in a sentence. It can even change the meaning, which is also known as emphatic stress. Then lastly, you have rhythm, the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in speech, like we discussed before. So before we move on to the next segment, I would like to point out that this area of phonology is particularly important for the child language acquisition section of the exam, which you will come to understand more as we indulge in deeper aspects of A levels. So for now, I will wrap it up over here and head on to graphology. Now, graphology is the study of the visual elements of the language. It aims to get the meaning of the text across through the spacing, the layout, etc. So it mainly focuses on how a text is visually represented to help analyze the text itself more intensively. So here are a few starting features of graphology to make you more used to the concept. Fairly simple. You got typeface, fonts and size of the text, leading the vertical spacing between lines of a text. You also have margins, alignment and placement of text on the page. Now, you might think these are fairly unimportant features and wonder how they can exactly help you in A-levels. Well, it will definitely help you, particularly in language change, where, amongst others, you will have to outline the graphological features of the passage. And in that section, these features will really help you to sort of understand the timeline and context, etc., of the text. For example, when you analyze some old texts, like this one right over here, this portion of a recent exam paper, which dates back to 1821-ish, you can see a lack of line breaks between the paragraphs, if you can see. Also known as the leading of the text, right? Which can be compared to today's presentation of such texts, because modern texts would typically be more spaced out and easy to read. So knowing these terms, using them accordingly, mentioning these things in your analysis will definitely make your analysis stand out because, well, you know your words. So that pretty much sums it up, and hence that is it for language frameworks. Now, this is just a basic guide to the topic, just the beginning if you must. There are definitely many more tidbits to it, which I will surely cover when we come across them as we navigate through the syllabus in the future. This is just to give you a very good and detailed heads up, so your foundation is sort of solidified for the next steps in your preparation. In fact, this is a mere dot in the vastness surrounding A-level English language, but my job is to make your analysis as coherent and linguistically accurate as possible, because, well, it never hurts to be a cool nerd at some things. So brush up on these basics, find out more if you want, and if you have any questions or requests for A-level English language, do comment below. I definitely know how stressful it can get, so I would love to make the path to a solid score easier for you guys. Over and out.